Okay, so I'm going to kind of go through a couple different areas of activism in Italy and give you a little bit of background information, and then the various forms and different things that people in Italy do. So kind of just to give a little bit of background information and just what makes activism in Italy interesting, in my opinion, has to do with kind of the way the country is set up and a problem that they faced for a long time now in their history. So Italy, in my opinion, is a beautiful country, but it definitely has its issues. And one of these big issues is corruption. And this corruption takes place in different forms. There's the mafia, nepotism, all these things. And unfortunately, this corruption, it holds influence over citizens, over people in Italy, and that can have some effects on their ability or how much activism they choose to partake in. So, for example, kind of to delve a little bit deeper into this, explain myself a little bit more. So, for the mafia, so as you all might remember from some of my past presentations, the mafia, while it's often stereotyped a little bit, it does exist in Italy, and it is a large part of the corruption that goes on in the country, specifically in the South, in this case. And so there have definitely been increased anti-mafia movements in the past 20 years, which is obviously a good thing. And that's activism in and of itself. If you look at it as people speaking out and taking action against the mafia, that is activism. However, like I said before, it's something that holds influence over people and places. And so specifically in the South, maybe in the smaller towns where everyone knows everyone, people are hesitant to speak their mind and be activists in some areas, because the mafia does have control over, their livelihood or maybe their jobs or something like that. And kind of going along with this, there's also nepotism is kind of is a big issue in Italy. I don't know if you all know what nepotism is. It's when people who are in power, so people that have a higher up job, whether it's in government or within a big company or something, they have power and they have the power to give jobs and everything else. And so they favor their relatives or their friends. And this is kind of it's a part of what the mafia does as well, but also it's larger than just the mafia in Italy. My Italian host sister, she's a really smart student, loves school, loves to study, but when it came time for her to decide what she wanted to do, she was always really negative about getting into kind of the equivalent of what law school is over there in Italy. And this was because you have to have connections over there in order to get into a school or get a certain job. And so these are all these big parts of corruption. And it's frustrating, I believe, for Italians. A lot of Italians want certain social or political change, and they definitely do use activism, but to try and achieve this. But a lot of their efforts are pushed down or muffled a little bit due to kind of some of this background corruption. And so this is just something that I think is interesting to keep in mind, and something to keep in mind that, could affect activism in certain countries and certain areas. And also just looking at the different cultural kind of parts that can go into activism. But with this kind of background information, just because there is corruption in Italy and that it kind of changes a little bit that arena of activism, that doesn't mean that by any means that it shuts down activism. So now I'm going to kind of go into a couple common outlets for activism in Italy. And these are also things that I've seen or experienced myself while I've been in Italy. And so it's kind of cool to truly see or be a part of the activism that's taking place. So, okay. So a big form of activism in Italy are gli scioperi, or strikes, is what that means in Italian. Strikes are very common in Italy in order for certain groups of people to make their voices heard. One of the big types of strikes are transportation strikes. And so this is where, this is when, public transportation is a big part of a lot of European countries, and specifically in Italy. If you live in a big city or the surrounding areas, a lot of people rely on public transportation to get from one place to the other. So they rely on it to get to their job every morning and come home or get to the store. Whether this is buses or trains or any taxis even. And so when there's a transportation strike, no one in the transportation sector comes to work. Sometimes this is just for a day. Other times they do really lengthy strikes. So it could be even longer. And something interesting about transportation strikes is the strikers have a website that warns people. They go ahead and plan their strikes in advance. And so you can actually go onto this website and look up a day and a time or the area, the region that you are in the country, and see if there's going to be a strike or not. I always kind of found that funny. You're kind of warning people of what you're about to do. So it seems like it would sort of take away a little bit of the point of getting their voices heard and getting their point across. But when you're living in Italy, it comes in handy. One time I was going to take a day trip to a little town outside of Bologna, and my roommates had heard that there might be strikes coming to the area soon. And so they told me to look it up on the website, and I went, and had I gone, then I probably would have gotten stranded in that little town. So yeah, that's just kind of one way that, again, is very common for certain groups of people to get their voices heard. They're trying to show to people, you all rely on us on a daily basis, and so we want higher wages, or we want better benefits. And these are the things that they're taking that they're using this form of activism to try and argue, or to try and get their point across and bring about change. And then another form that is very common is rallies. And so kind of rallies and marches, which, as we were talking about, you guys brought up at the beginning of the class, talking about women's marches and all the marches that have been going on recently in the United States. This is a form of activism that I had never really seen in the United States. And then when I went to Italy for the first time, it seemed like they were really common there. And now I would say they're becoming more common in the US as well. But it was something that I really saw for the first time in Italy. And so a lot of these rallies, they're for a certain cause. So a big one in Italy is refugees' rights. This picture in the middle is from a rally in Bologna, in the city that I was studying in, and they're rallying for refugees' rights. There's a lot of refugees that arrive in Italy from African countries. As I've talked about, they arrive through the south and then kind of typically make their way up through the country. And it's a huge political point of contestment. The refugees are largely discriminated against, but then there are groups that, want to make them feel welcome and want to fight for their equal rights. And so this is where kind of a lot of activism comes in, and marches are planned very often, especially in the bigger cities. And in Bologna, for one, I know I saw at least probably 2 different refugee marches while I was there, because it's a university city, so it's a lot of young people that are getting out and being very active. And there's always a bunch of signs carried, and often some chants. And this is, again, like I said before, activism to get their voices heard and argue for the equality of refugees. And same goes for women's rights. There's also been a lot of women's rallies and marches. Italy is it's a progressive country, but it's still largely a patriarchal society. So, historically, men have always been the most powerful, and this is something that a lot of women and men in Italy are trying to change and trying to empower women, and they do this through rallies and marches. And so now, kind of going into a little bit of a different realm of activism, I'm going to talk to you all about street art. So street art is kind of it's becoming, especially in Italy, a growing arena for activism, specifically in certain areas. But another word for it, I guess, is graffiti, but it's often has some type of political or social message that is trying to be portrayed and for anyone walking on the streets to see. And so these are some pictures of political street art, which has definitely has a pretty big presence in Italy, specifically in Bologna. And these three are three examples of anti-Berlusconi street art, which is very common. So Berlusconi was the prime minister of Italy for a while, and he's a very controversial political figure. And these pieces of street art show how the Italian people are feeling. It says Berlusconi game over, saying he's going to be out of there soon, wanted. Please turn off this TV, with a bunch of Berlusconi. Berlusconi was had a big TV presence before he became a politician. So these are some examples, just a few examples of political street art that you can find in Italy. And then even more than just only politicians, there's more street art. So now I'm going to talk to you about one of the biggest Italian street artists, and his name is Blue. Blue was born in a small town, but he actually lives in Bologna now, and is probably, I would say, the most famous Italian street artist. He's created a big name for himself in Italy. He also has works in other areas of the world. He went on a group with a couple of kind of like a tour with a couple of their street artists through Central and South America, so has work all in big cities all throughout there. Blue isn't his real name, by the way. It's kind of his street art name, and he keeps his identity anonymous. But he tends to work in bigger cities and kind of in the industrial areas of town. He likes big murals, so typically he'll take up an entire wall of however many story building. And he has a big following, especially in Bologna. When I first moved there and was kind of exploring the city with my roommates, they took me around and pointed out all the pieces of Blue's street art, because a lot of them have either political or social messages. He takes some political stances. He also speaks out about corruption and other structures and social Italian issues. And so it's just kind of cool that he's such a big presence especially in one city. And then this picture, I included this picture because this is one of his biggest murals. This is just the bottom edge of it. It's probably a 10-story building, and the mural covered the entire thing. And it's kind of was based around, speaking out against the chaos and corruption of Italy. But then Bologna, and it was in Bologna, the city of Bologna decided to do a street art exhibition. And so they were taking not only pictures and putting them in a gallery of the street art, but then also having them on stops along kind of a tour that you could take. And a lot of blues pieces were a part of this tour. But this kind of went against what he thought of as the point of street art, kind of the I guess, kind of day-to-day activism that just comes with walking by a piece of street art and looking at it and seeing what, the meanings that are behind it. He didn't like that it was becoming a part of this organized exhibition. And so he actually went back and destroyed and covered up, I think, almost 50 pieces of his own street art. This particular piece, he scraped all the paint off. Some of them he, spray painted over and things like that. And so this actually happened. I saw this mural in 2015, and then it was in 2016 when he destroyed it. And so when I heard about this and heard about him, ruining, in a sense, of his own art, it's his own certain type of protest against what the city of Bologna was doing. So in a way, he's using this new form of activism, this destruction of his own work, to make a point about the original work in and of itself. So it's this kind of very interesting idea around activism and how it's portrayed in cities, and specifically, as I said, street art. And so that's kind of all I have for Italy. And now I'm going to pass it over to Sean, and she is going to talk to you all about activism in England.